There are moments in a person's life that seem ordinary at first glance, like just another class passing quietly. But beneath the surface, they become turning points, where silence reaches its depths, talent lies buried, and quiet courage sparks a revolution in education. The halls of Westside High were as noisy as ever that morning. Students swarmed between classes, footsteps rushed past, zippers clinked, and teenage laughter rang out sharp and wild. But the moment Thompson opened the door to the math room, it all went still. He stood at the threshold, breath shallow, his faded backpack clutched tightly to his chest like a young soldier lost in enemy territory. Inside, every head turned. Some shook with disapproval, others snickered, and in the center of it all stood Miss Veronica Maxwell. Hair pulled into a bun, not a strand out of place, dress crisp as if time itself couldn't wrinkle it. She didn't need to raise her voice. One glance from her was enough to make the kids flinch. Late again, Thompson. No yelling. No need. Her voice was cold steel, cutting clean through every word. Take your seat. Now, Thompson swallowed hard. His eyes scanned the room, searching for sympathy, a safe place to land. But there was none. Every head was down. Everyone afraid. Everyone had been a victim, but no one dared to speak up. He opened his mouth, voice trembling with nerves. "Ma'am, I'd like to stand for class today, if that's okay." The words were thin as thread, but they cracked the room like glass. A silence hung in the air until Maxwell broke it with a mocking laugh. "Oh, feeling special today, are we? Or is this just another excuse to dodge class?" Her tone didn't rise, but it dripped with ridicule. Yesterday it was family issues, the day before, headache, and now, what, back pain? What's next, math allergy? A few kids chuckled. In the back corner, Zach, the class clown known for laughing at everything, slightly clapped like he was watching a comedy show. Thompson didn't react. He just gripped the straps of his backpack tighter, as if to dig his fingernails in deep enough to anchor himself. The pain in his back, a leftover from the wooden ruler Maxwell had struck him with last week, was still burning. But worse than the pain was knowing no one believed him. Mrs. Maxwell moved toward the board, her eyes never leaving Thompson. "Very well. Since you're so eager to stand out, I'll give you a chance to prove just how special you are." She erased the algebra problem meant for the class, then began scribbling a string of long, twisted symbols, formulas no eighth grader had ever seen in a textbook. Integrals, derivatives, functions in motion, layered like a labyrinth. "This is an advanced 11th grade calculus problem," Maxwell declared, turning to Thompson with a smug stare. "You have 5 minutes. Fail to solve it, and you'll stay after school every day this week. I believe that might help you learn some discipline." And just like that, the play began. But the lead role didn't belong to the one who wrote the script, and Thompson stood frozen, as if nailed to the floor. But inside, a whole different world was rising. He remembered the public library, the dim yellow lamps, the elderly librarian who always smiled at him like an old friend, a place where no one looked down on him for a worn-out uniform, a place where books and numbers treated everyone the same. He remembered the first time he cracked open a dusty book on differential equations, a soft-spoken voice in a YouTube video that unlocked an entire universe. Around him, snickers echoed again, but Thompson stayed silent, not out of fear, but because he was choosing. Standing between the ache in his back and the challenge on the board, he was choosing the one way forward that didn't require him to bow. No one, not even Maxwell, knew that the very problem meant to humiliate him would be the doorway to his truth. Thompson didn't move. His eyes locked onto the whiteboard cluttered with strange symbols. The ticking wall clock kept rhythm like a cold reminder. Time was running out. He could hear whispers from the back of the room, half mocking, half rooting for his failure. But then, through the swirl of anxiety and humiliation in his chest, something sparked. Not light exactly, but a sensation. A faint recognition of the numbers challenging him. They weren't strangers. He'd met them before. Not in this classroom, but in a much quieter place. The West Side Public Library. That library had become his refuge every Tuesday and Thursday, when his classmates were deep in online games or scrolling TikTok through dinner. No one noticed the quiet kid slipping out before sunset, bag heavy with old printouts and notebooks filled with penciled formulas. No one asked why he always walked in the opposite direction from everyone else. And no one guessed his destination wasn't some internet cafe or vacant lot, but a different world entirely. The world of knowledge. There he was always greeted by Mrs. Doyle, the elderly librarian with silver hair and low-hanging glasses, who'd always murmur warmly, "Back again, Thompson." He'd just smile softly and head straight for the dusty math section, where titles like Advanced Calculus and Theoretical Mathematics sat undisturbed. Thompson's love for math didn't grow from a classroom. It started in the cramped three-bedroom house where he grew up. At 7, he had watched his father measure window frames for wooden casings. His dad, a construction worker who never finished high school, once told him, "Math is the language of the universe, son. People might lie, but numbers never do." Those words etched themselves deep into his mind. Every time life spun out of control, when his mom pulled double shifts, when his dad came home after a long day with calloused hands, math was the one place where Thompson found logic, fairness, and beauty. No one at school knew that Thompson's bedroom walls didn't have posters of rock bands or famous athletes. Instead, they were covered in printed-out formulas, screenshots from YouTube blackboards, and handwritten proofs layered like treasure maps. 3 months ago, on a random trip to the library, he stumbled upon an advanced calculus book left behind on a reading table. Whoever placed it there never came back for it. Thompson, on the other hand, couldn't tear himself away from the scribbled pages. At first they looked like alien code, but the more he read, the more he realized they had rhythm, they had structure, they had meaning, like music but without instruments, just a patient mind and a sharp pencil. After that, most nights he studied by the light of his phone, tucked under blankets so he wouldn't wake his little sister. He'd tap through videos, jot down techniques, and solve problems in his worn notebook, one slow step at a time. Not for a contest, not for praise, but because, for the first time, he felt like he truly understood something bigger than himself. Sometimes his mom would call out from the kitchen, "Dinner's ready, honey," and he'd slip the notebook under his pillow. Not because he was ashamed, but because he didn't want them to worry he was pushing himself too hard. He knew they were already running on fumes. Then one night, his dad walked in and found the notebook wide open. He sat down, flipping through it, his rough fingers trembling slightly over each formula. "What's all this?" he asked, not with suspicion, just confusion. Just stuff I've been teaching myself," Thompson replied, heart thudding, afraid he was about to get scolded. But his dad didn't scold him. He sat there in silence for a long moment, then rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "You keep going. That brain of yours is going to take you places these hands never could." From that night on, they didn't talk about it much, but the quiet support never left. His mom started bringing home old books discarded from the hospital. His dad, when measuring lumber on weekends, would read out loud the math and turn to say, "Check my math, will ya?" They didn't need to understand everything he was doing. They just needed to believe in him. And for Thompson, that belief was a kind of love, deeper than words. Thompson had never seen the class this silent. No more snickering, no more whispers, only the steady tick of the classroom clock, like a slow heartbeat pounding in his chest, ready to burst. 4 minutes left. Mrs. Maxwell leaned back behind her desk, arms crossed as if the verdict was already in. To her, this wasn't a test, it was a public sentencing. And that thin, tired boy with the deep-set eyes was just a foolish rebel about to be crushed. No one knew what was happening inside Thompson's head. In the tick of the clock, he began piecing together fragments of memory. Those long hours buried in library stacks, the late-night scribbles under a blanket of silence, and the quiet hum of his dad whispering numbers while hammering nails. All those things, once scattered, now gently converged like notes in a familiar melody. The math problem wasn't a maze anymore, it was a map, one he'd walked in secret many times before. Thompson took a deep breath. His shaky hand reached for the dry erase marker. Behind him a voice snorted. "He's really gonna write something." A few laughs followed, but not mocking this time, confused. Because no one, not even Zach, the eternal jokester, actually believed he'd go through with it. He touched the board. The first stroke trembled. The second was steadier. Then, like something invisible guiding him, his hand found its rhythm. The classroom faded. There was only the whiteboard, now coming alive with one line after another. Each symbol pulsed like a heartbeat from a soul that had waited too long to be seen. Every substitution, every step, every integral flowed out of him, not like a solution, but like a memory, like he wasn't solving a problem, but retelling a story he already knew. 1 minute passed. No one made a sound. Then came whispers. "Wait, is he actually doing it right? No way. I don't even get what the question was." Veronica Maxwell still sat in her confident pose, but something flickered in her eyes. Her lips tightened. Her fingers gripped the desk edge just a little harder. This, what was unfolding, wasn't in the script she'd written. 3 minutes later, Thompson put the marker down. He circled his final answer with 2 sharp strokes. He didn't look up right away. He was still breathing deep and even, like someone who just surfaced after swimming from the bottom of a lake. Then he turned around. The room was frozen in disbelief, as if time itself had stopped. Mrs. Maxwell shot to her feet. She marched to the board, eyes scanning every line, searching for a crack, a slip-up. But the longer she looked, the more the doubt on her face dissolved into silence. And then there was no more doubt, only confusion, plain and raw. "This," she stammered. "This." But the words shattered in the thick air of truth. Thompson didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew he was right. He knew that solution hadn't come from anywhere but effort, grit, and the quiet faith of those who loved him in silence. But then the confusion vanished from Ms. Maxwell's face, replaced by the cold, familiar armor of authority clinging to its crumbling pride. "Where did you copy this from?" she growled. "Did you memorize it off the internet? Did someone feed it to you?" The room held its breath. Half hoped he'd fight back, half waited for him to crumble. Thompson simply said, almost in a whisper, "No, ma'am, I did it myself." And so the truth was written not in words but in chalk, in numbers, in a silence no one could deny. The question was no longer how smart this boy was, but why had no one seen it before? The air in the classroom turned thick the moment Thompson laid down the marker. The silence was tight as a drawn string, and in the center of it Veronica Maxwell couldn't hide the flicker of unease on her face. But only for a moment, because then she snapped back into the role she'd worn for years. Her face flushed red as she pointed at the board like she'd just been personally insulted. "No way he couldn't have solved that problem. He hasn't even passed basic 8th grade algebra." Thompson stood there, eyes still holding a trace of hope. "I solved it correctly, ma'am. That's an integral requiring a substitution." "Enough!" Maxwell's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't allow cheating in my classroom." "I didn't cheat," Thompson said, for the first time with a hint of defiance in his voice. "That's the right answer. If you check, you'll see." "You're telling me how to do my job now?" Maxwell shouted, cutting him off before he could finish. Then, to the shock of the entire class, she snatched the marker from his hand and began furiously erasing the entire board. Each swipe bitter, angry. The equations Thompson had written, not just with knowledge, but with everything he had, were scraped away, like they never existed. She wasn't done. She ripped the notebook paper from his hands and tore it in half. The sound of it echoed sharp in the room, like a truth being buried alive. To the principal's office. "Now," Maxwell screamed, "I will not tolerate dishonesty, disrespect, or disruption in my classroom." Thompson didn't move. His hands trembled, clutching his backpack. The shredded pages with his handwriting floated down to the floor, remnants of a miracle denied by power and prejudice. But he didn't lower his head. Zach, the kid who once macked Thompson, always the first to laugh when his name got called, looked at him now with a different expression. No smirk, just confusion, and maybe for the first time, a flicker of respect. A quiet voice rose from the back of the room. But what if Thompson really did solve it? Everyone turned. It was Aisha, the shy girl who rarely spoke. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. Maxwell spun around, her stare sharp as a knife. Not another word. "Thompson, out." Thompson turned to go, his back straight, but his hand clenched tight around the strap of his backpack, holding on to the last strength he had left. Each step was a silent goodbye to the belief that justice existed in that room. He didn't cry, but as the door clicked shut behind him, the scraps of paper still fluttered on the ground. Silent evidence no one bothered to pick up. Out in the hallway, Thompson sat alone on the hard wooden bench, facing the frosted glass of the principal's office. He'd sat here before for attitude issues or non-compliance. But today was different. Today he'd done nothing wrong. Today he'd done everything right. And somehow, that's what made it all fall apart. On the other side of the door, Miss Maxwell's voice rang sharp and high. He could see her silhouette pacing, pointing, spinning a perfect story about a defiant student, disruptive and disrespectful, who somehow managed to solve a problem well beyond his supposed limits. "He's a weak student. All year long, he's barely made passing grades. There's no way he did this on his own," she said, certain, as if grades were fate, and what Thompson had done was a betrayal of the system itself. He sat there, eyes fixed on the gray tile floor. No tears, no excuses, just thoughts. Of library hours, of his dad flipping through notebook pages with wonder in his eyes, of his mom's gentle reminder, "If you're tired, rest. Don't push yourself too hard." He thought about truths and the cost of it. Thompson closed his eyes, and in that moment, he wasn't sitting in a school hallway anymore. He was suspended above a deep, invisible divide. On one side, months of quiet study. On the other, disbelief in the eyes of adults who were supposed to protect him. How could he possibly solve a college-level calculus problem? Maxwell hissed from behind the frosted glass. Either he memorized it, or he had the answer hidden somewhere. Her voice was sharp as a blade, full of certainty, as if she were describing a deliberate fraud, not a child just trying to prove he was capable. Thompson opened his eyes just as the door swung open. Principal Williams stepped out, tall, lean, with salt and pepper hair and an expression heavy with the weariness of yet another story in a long line of disappointments. "Come in, Thompson." He walked in, every step sending a stab of pain through his back. The injury from last week's strike still hadn't healed. But he showed nothing. Across from him sat Ms. Maxwell, her face hard, arms crossed, ready for battle, like he was a threat to everything she stood for. "Mrs. Maxwell has told me everything," Williams began. "Do you have anything to say?" Thompson swallowed hard. "I didn't cheat, sir. I solved that problem myself." Maxwell let out a laugh, a joyless, flat laugh. "That's ridiculous. He's never shown the slightest talent for math in my class, and now we're supposed to believe he can do advanced calculus? Not in class," Thompson replied, eyes lowered. "But at home, I've been studying for over a year. Oh, sure, next thing he'll say is he's interning with NASA, Maxwell cut in, dripping with sarcasm. The principal raised his hand, signaling for quiet. He looked at Thompson, eyes thoughtful. Why did you refuse to sit down in class? Thompson hesitated. His eyes met Maxwell's, sharp, warning, threatening. He looked away, voice barely audible. My back hurt. Williams leaned in. Since when? Thompson looked up, ready to speak, but then he saw Maxwell's ice-cold glare. In that split second, he knew. If he told the truth, she'd deny it. And this time, there'd be no one to back him up. Last week, I fell, he lied. A painful lie, but the only one that might let him walk out of that room whole. He's lying, Maxwell snapped, full of conviction. He's spinning this whole story to cover up for disrupting class and cheating. Principal Williams stared at them both for a long moment. Then he turned to Thompson. Mrs. Maxwell has been teaching for over 20 years. If she says you didn't solve that problem on your own, I have reason to believe her. And that sentence, plain as it sounded, crushed something deep inside Thompson. A year of quiet studying, nights hunched over old books, scribbled notes on brown scrap paper, the soft glow of a phone screen in the dark, all for a chance. Just one chance. And now that he'd finally stepped forward, what met him was a verdict without compassion. I solved it, he said, voice shaking. I really did. I can do it again. Any problem, sir. Just give me. Maxwell scoffed again. This time the sound was weary, even annoyed. This is becoming a performance. I recommend 2 days of in-school suspension for defiance and disruption. The principal nodded, reaching for the discipline form. I agree. Thompson looked at that piece of paper, like a sentence handed down to someone who dared to step outside the lines others drew for him. He didn't cry. He didn't force a smile. He simply lowered his head, took the slip, and walked out. And as he left the office, the voice in his head wasn't blame or anger. It was his father's. That brain of yours will take you farther than these hands ever could. But today he learned something else. Sometimes talent isn't enough. You also need someone willing to believe in what they can't yet see. Thompson closed his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't standing in a school hallway anymore. He was standing at the edge of something invisible and vast. On one side, the long, quiet nights spent studying. On the other, the doubtful stares of adults who were supposed to protect him. How could he possibly solve a college-level calculus problem? Maxwell had hissed just minutes before. Either he memorized it, or he had the answer hidden somewhere. Her words were sharp, cutting deep, not aimed at a lie, but at a boy who'd done nothing more than try to prove himself. He opened his eyes just as the office door creaked open again. Principal Williams stood there, tall and tired-looking, his eyes clouded like he'd just listened to one more thing that made the world a little heavier. Come in, Thompson. Each step into that room sent a jolt through Thompson's back. The bruises hadn't healed, but he didn't let it show. Across from him, Miss Maxwell sat stiff, arms crossed tight, ready to defend her name like it was under siege. Mrs. Maxwell has told me everything, Williams began. Do you have anything to say? Thompson swallowed hard. I didn't cheat, sir. I solved that problem myself. Maxwell let out a laugh. Cold, humorless. That's absurd. He's never once shown a shred of mathematical talent in my class, and now we're to believe he can do advanced calculus? Not in class, Thompson replied, eyes downcast. But at home. I've been studying for the past year. Oh, what's next? He'll say he's been consulting for NASA. Maxwell cut in, mocking. The principal raised a hand, signaling her to stop. He turned to Thompson, gaze thoughtful. Why did you refuse to sit down in class? Thompson hesitated. His eyes met Maxwell's, sharp and warning, like a silent threat. He looked away, and his voice came out barely louder than a breath. My back hurt. Williams leaned forward. Since when? Thompson looked up, about to speak, then saw Maxwell's icy stare again. In that instant, he knew. If he spoke the truth, she'd deny it, and no one would believe him. Last week, I fell. It was a lie, a painful, heavy lie, but the only one he could survive. You're lying, Maxwell snapped, full of confidence. He's making all of this up to distract from the fact that he disrupted my class and cheated. Principal Williams sat silently for a long moment, looking between the two of them. Then he turned to Thompson. Ms. Maxwell has over 20 years of experience. If she says you didn't solve that problem, I have reason to believe her. And that sentence, so casual on the surface, crushed something inside Thompson. A full year of quiet study, late nights bent over old textbooks, scribbles on brown paper, the dim light of a phone screen. All for one chance. And now, when he finally stepped forward, what he received was cold dismissal. I did solve it, he said, voice trembling. I can do it again. Any problem you can give me. Maxwell laughed again. This time it was tired, as if she were done with the act. This is becoming a spectacle. I recommend 2 days of in-school suspension for defiance and disruption. The principal nodded, reaching for the disciplinary slip. I agree. Thompson looked at the slip, like a sentence for someone who dared to step outside the mold others forced him into. He didn't cry. He didn't even try to smile. He just bowed his head, accepted it, and turned to leave. And as he walked out of the room, the only sound in his head wasn't blame. It was his father's voice. That brain of yours will take you farther than these hands ever could. But today, Thompson learned something else. Sometimes, talent isn't enough. Sometimes, you need someone who's willing to believe in something they can't yet see. The moment that slip left Principal Williams's hand, it hit Thompson like a cold slap across the last shred of his hope. He didn't speak, didn't fight back. He just clenched it in his hand, eyes low, like a flame snuffed out by wind. In front of him, Maxwell allowed herself a small, victorious smile. The kind of smile she wore often. In her world, justice served power, and truth was something you edited to fit the moment. But then, a small sound, knock, knock. The door eased open, a young face appeared, bright, alive, a beam of warmth piercing the gloom. It was Miss Carter, the science teacher, who carried with her the kind of energy that reminded people of early spring's sunshine. Her eyes went straight to Thompson, and her expression tightened with concern. Sorry to interrupt, she said gently but firmly. I heard Thompson was in here. What's going on? No one had time to answer. She'd already seen the slip in his hand. What's that, Thompson? Maxwell jumped in without pause, like muscle memory. Just an internal discipline matter. It doesn't concern science. Carter didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She just raised an eyebrow. If it involves one of my best students, then yes. It absolutely concerns me. Thompson, best student? Maxwell laughed, sharp and condescending, as if she'd just been told a fairy tale. Carter turned to the principal, her tone now serious. I want to know why he's being written up. Williams straightened his collar awkwardly. According to Miss Maxwell, he disrupted class and allegedly cheated on a higher-level math problem. Carter squinted. Higher level? You mean high school math? What exactly did he do? Solve an integral? Maxwell nodded. I gave him the problem as a lesson to teach him discipline. At that moment, Thompson said nothing. He just watched quietly as something strange stirred in his chest. It felt like the sensation of falling off a cliff, only to realize someone had reached out and grabbed your hand. Thompson, Carter said gently, her voice softer now, does this have anything to do with last year's science fair project? He nodded, the first nod since he'd entered the room, and for the first time all morning, a flicker of hope lit in his eyes. What project? The principal asked. Carter smiled, her face brightening as if recalling something worth holding on to. Thompson's project on mathematical models in plant growth. He didn't just experiment. He used differential equations to simulate how plants grow under different environmental conditions. His project won third place overall and first place in the mathematics category. Maxwell looked frozen, words stuck in her throat. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I discovered his potential last year, Carter continued. In his reports, he used formulas I'd never taught and weren't part of any curriculum. When I asked, he showed me notebooks full of self-study. And yes, you still have them, don't you? She turned to Thompson. This time he nodded more firmly, his eyes glowing. Someone remembered. Someone saw. For the first time, he wasn't alone in this room full of doubt. No way, Maxwell finally managed. He struggles in my class. He couldn't possibly— Because your class doesn't challenge him, Carter replied without hesitation. No offense, but Thompson is working on a completely different level. Principal Williams fell silent. He looked from Thompson to the two women, one clinging to the old framework and one opening a new door. The air in the room began to shift, slowly but unmistakably. It was the first time Thompson felt seen, not as a problem to fix, but as a mind worth nurturing. And what made that moment feel magical was that it didn't come from a speech. It came from a simple reminder of something he'd done, something he had been, and something no one had ever acknowledged before. The air in the principal's office grew heavy. No one spoke. The discipline slip lay on the desk like an unfinished sentence. Evidence of a far greater mistake, the mistake of prejudice. Mrs. Carter's voice stayed calm but clear. Thompson never wanted anyone to know. He doesn't like attention. She glanced at him, a trace of regret in her expression, not for speaking up, but for letting it go this far. But I can't stand by while he's punished for something he didn't do. The energy in the room shifted, visibly. Principal Williams grew thoughtful. And Ms. Maxwell, who just moments ago held all the power, now stood silent, her face tightening as confidence gave way to unease. Still, Maxwell inserted sharply, clinging to the last thread, that doesn't explain why he refused to follow the rules in class. Miss Carter turned slightly, her voice softening. Actually, I'd like to know that too. Thompson shifted. He opened his mouth, but the room froze as a quiet groan escaped him. Not out of fear, but from pain. Even the slightest movement sent a bolt through his spine. Carter noticed right away. Thompson, would you be willing to show us? Is a simple question, but it cut through the armor in that room like a blade. This is ridiculous, Maxwell snapped, rising to her feet. We're wasting time on a performance. Williams didn't say a word. He just raised a hand, face now stern and focused. Thompson, he said, please show us what Miss Carter is referring to. A pause. 1 second. 2. Then finally, Thompson clenched his jaw and slowly lifted the back of his shirt. A line of deep red bruises came into view. Long, clear, and cruel. These weren't from a fall. Not scrapes from horsing around. They were precise, repetitive marks, like lashes carved across young skin. Carter gasped. Williams stood upright in an instant. Oh my God, what happened, son? He asked, though his eyes had already shifted toward Maxwell, whose face was now draining of color. I fell, Thompson mumbled, tugging his shirt down quickly. Carter stepped forward. No one gets injuries like that from falling, Thompson. Maxwell finally found her voice, but it no longer carried the strength it once did. Clearly he's making this up. He could have been hurt at home, maybe got into a fight. That's enough, Miss Maxwell, Williams said, his tone heavy as iron. Thompson, these injuries, did they happen here at school? The boy lowered his head. Silence filled the room like held breath. Then, from somewhere near the floor, his voice rose, soft but clear. Last week, I was called to the board. I didn't finish in time. Nothing more needed to be said. The truth now hung in the air, suspended, undeniable. No excuse could stop it anymore. Maxwell quietly began to gather her bag, but Williams raised a hand. This meeting isn't over, Miss Maxwell. Please, have a seat. He turned toward Thompson and Carter, expression deep in thought. This needs to be investigated thoroughly. But first, we need to address what's now the core issue, your academic ability. He clasped his hands on the desk. Thompson, do you truly believe you can solve college-level math problems? The boy didn't answer right away, but slowly he nodded, no longer hesitant, and that was the first moment after years of being labeled a problem that a student like him was asked a question as though he mattered. The new door had opened, and this time no one stood in the way. Yes, sir, Thompson replied. No more trembling, no more shrinking back, just a calm, grounded answer, as if he'd made a vow to himself. I won't be silent anymore. Principal Williams nodded, then declared, I propose we organize a test, a fair, transparent exam, to genuinely evaluate your math abilities. Mrs. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, lips curling into a bitter smile. Perfect. I'll prepare the exam myself. I'll show him what real mathematics looks like. But Miss Carter spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. Given the current circumstances, I think it would be best if Ms. Maxwell didn't write the exam. Maxwell snapped her head around. Are you questioning my professional integrity? I'm not questioning, Carter answered calmly. I'm simply suggesting we remove anything that could be seen as biased, so the results can speak for themselves, for all of us. Williams nodded, as if making fairness official. Ms. Maxwell will prepare the test, but I'll review and approve it beforehand to ensure it's impartial. He turned to Thompson. Can you be ready by tomorrow morning? Will that give you enough time? Thompson nodded, but in his eyes a ripple of quiet doubt passed through. Everything was changing, but was it truly changing for the better? The principal continued. In the meantime, I'll be contacting your parents regarding the injuries on your back, and the disciplinary action is suspended pending the results of the exam. Maxwell stood again, her shoulders tight with frustration. If you're all set on entertaining this little circus, then at least do it properly. The exam should include a full range, from ninth grade problems to advanced calculus. If he's the prodigy Miss Carter claims, he shouldn't have a problem. Agreed, Williams said. But let's be clear, Miss Maxwell. If Thompson succeeds, a lot will have to change, including teaching methods and how you treat your students. As Thompson left the office alongside Miss Carter, he felt like he'd just escaped a room with no oxygen. But there was still another mountain ahead. Tomorrow would decide everything. Either he'd be seen for who he really was, or he'd be buried again, this time by the very numbers adults used to prove he didn't belong. Behind him, Miss Maxwell's voice still echoed down the hall. This is absurd. My reputation can't be challenged by some child's fantasy. The principal's reply was too low for anyone to catch, but the way his eyes followed Maxwell said it all. The truth, denied or not, can still find its voice. That afternoon, walking home, the breeze rustled through the trees like whispers around Thompson's ears. He walked slowly, repeating theorems, formulas, and graphs in his mind. But somewhere behind them, fear lingered. What if the test was rigged? What if Ms. Maxwell didn't need him to fail, just not be perfect? His phone buzzed. Sender. Dr. James Roberts, mathematics professor at City University, the only adult who once handed Thompson a calculus book without asking why a kid needed it. 6 months ago, in a quiet corner of the Westside Community Center, Dr. Roberts spotted a boy sitting alone, hunched over a thick math textbook that most college freshmen didn't even bother opening. Instead of asking, "Why are you reading that?" he simply said, "Want me to take a look at the part that's got you stuck?" And since then, they'd met every week. No fuss, no spotlight, just numbers, and two minds finding each other through pure logic. Tomorrow Thompson would step into an exam room, not to prove he was better than anyone else, but to defend something he'd always been told he didn't have. The first time they met, Thompson was alone at the back table at the community center, his head buried in a worn-out freshman calculus book, its pages yellowed like it had once been read too many times and then forgotten. He was so absorbed he didn't even notice someone was standing behind him. That's pretty heavy stuff for your age. came a calm, curious voice. Thompson jumped. He was used to mockery like that, but this time the man just sat down beside him and didn't ask why a kid was reading a college text. Instead, he asked, "Mind if I see how you're approaching that integral?" They sat there for an hour. His name was Dr. James Roberts, a university math professor who volunteered every week at the community center. Unlike other educators, he didn't teach from a curriculum. He taught based on who was in front of him. After that session, he offered, "I could tutor you privately, twice a week. You've got something rare, and gifts like that need to be nurtured." At first, Thompson kept it a secret from his parents, not out of shame, but fear. Fear they'd worry. Fear they'd think he was pushing himself too hard, chasing things too advanced. But eventually, Dr. Roberts insisted on meeting them in person. In their small living room lit by a chipped floor lamp, he looked Thompson's parents in the eye and said, "Your son doesn't just solve equations. He sees connections most college students miss. In math, we call that elegant thinking. Thompson has it." His father sat upright, like his spine, bent from years of labor, had just been lifted by pride. His mother was more practical. "Will this affect his regular schoolwork?" "On the contrary," Dr. Roberts replied, "it'll help him rise above every barrier." Now, looking at the glowing text on his phone, as usual, Thompson simply typed back 3 words: "Need extra help." 30 minutes later, they were seated across from each other at their usual corner in the city library. No mention of the exam. They started, like always, with blank paper, pencils, and problems that would make most high schoolers give up before trying. "So, your teacher finally recognized your talent?" Roberts asked, eyes twinkling with dry humor behind wire-rimmed glasses. Thompson gave a half-smile. "Not really. She found out the hard way." He told the whole story, from standing up in class, to the advanced problem, to the silent punishment handed down by a system that had always ignored him. When he mentioned the bruises on his back, Robert's expression darkened. "That's assault, Thompson, nothing else." Thompson nodded. "I know, but if I'd said something, who would have believed me? She's been there over 20 years. Roberts clenched a fist, then slowly let it go. "We protect institutions more than we protect people, even though institutions are supposed to serve people." Then he leaned in, voice more serious. "About tomorrow's exam, based on what you've described, it's going to be tough. She's counting on you stumbling." "I'm scared," Thompson admitted. "What if I forget a formula? What if I freeze?" Roberts placed a firm hand on the open notebook. "Math isn't about memorizing formulas. It's about how you see the problem, how you spot the structure hiding beneath the surface. You don't need to remember everything. You need to trust the instincts you've trained through every late night you stayed up learning alone." This wasn't just a tutoring session anymore. It was mental preparation for battle. Thompson understood that tomorrow, when he walked into that exam room, he wouldn't just carry knowledge. He'd carry every silent hour, every quiet act of faith from the people who believed in him when the world turned away. And sometimes, that's the only thing powerful enough to flip the board. Trust your instincts, Thompson. Your brain was made to think mathematically, and no one can take that from you. Dr. Roberts' voice echoed in his head all through their late-night session. Not formulas, not dry theory, but understanding. Math wasn't about memorization. It was about seeing what others overlooked. In those 2 hours, they didn't focus on drilling every question. They focused on perspective, on listening to the silent language of numbers. Roberts emphasized, being good at math doesn't mean solving fast. It means thinking deep. As they closed the last book, Roberts paused, then asked, "Thompson, would you like me to be at school tomorrow? Not to help with the exam, but to stand behind you afterward and explain to the principal who you really are." Thompson looked at him, surprised. "You'd do that?" "Of course," Roberts smiled. "A mentor doesn't just teach. They stand with you when it matters." For the first time since everything began, Thompson truly felt hope. Tomorrow wasn't just about proving someone wrong. It was about proving himself right, about giving voice to all those silent years. The next morning he arrived at school earlier than usual. The hallways were still quiet, his footsteps echoing faintly against the tiled floor like they carried every ounce of tension he had. But today, unlike all the other times he'd been called to the principal's office, he didn't walk with his head down. The exam wasn't held in Ms. Maxwell's classroom. It was in the conference room, specially arranged by Principal Williams. A small detail, maybe, but to Thompson, it felt like fresh air in a room no longer thick with old authority. Waiting outside the door was Miss Carter. Always exactly where she needed to be. "I figured you could use a little encouragement before you go in," she said, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous, but ready," Thompson replied, not smiling, but with fire behind his eyes. Inside, everything was set neatly. At the center of the table sat a sealed envelope, his exam, waiting to be opened. Principal Williams greeted him with formal politeness. Ms. Maxwell sat stiff, arms folded, face blank, like a self-amended judge awaiting the first stumble to hand down her verdict. The exam includes problems ranging from 8th grade algebra to advanced calculus, Williams explained. "Ms. Maxwell prepared the questions and I've reviewed them to ensure fairness. You have 2 hours to complete as much as you can," Maxwell added, her voice cold. "The questions increase in difficulty. I don't expect you to finish. Frankly, I'll be surprised if you make it past the first page." Carter frowned but said nothing. She knew any defense now would only undermine the fairness Thompson was working so hard to earn. Williams continued. "I'll supervise. Ms. Maxwell and Ms. Carter will wait in the hallway. No one enters unless instructed." Thompson sat down. He inhaled deeply. In front of him, blank paper, freshly sharpened pencils, a simple calculator, and a future waiting to be drawn out in logic and clarity. "Any questions before we begin?" He shook his head. Williams tore open the seal. The exam was placed in front of him. "Begin when you're ready, Thompson." The door closed. No more voices. No more eyes watching. Just Thompson and the test, and the steady tick of the wall clock counting down the moments. He took a deep breath and opened the exam. The first question appeared like a joke, an easy problem he could solve half asleep. Within seconds, the answer was down. The first page was done in under 5 minutes. Page 2 brought slightly more complexity. Some trigonometry, a few higher degree equations. Still, it was familiar terrain. Thompson not only solved them, but checked every step, like he was talking to himself. "Is this the cleanest way? Can I do this more elegantly?" Page 3 opened like a door back into home. Pre-calculus, the bridge to the magical world of differentiation and integration. He slowed down, not because it was hard, but because he wanted to savor it. It felt like coming home after a long, hard journey. And then page 4, calculus. Every question on this page was an invitation, a dare, a challenge whispered to the boy who had spent countless nights under the dim glow of a phone screen when the whole house was asleep. Every tip Dr. Roberts had given him, every discovery he'd made on his own, now converged on the page in front of him. Outside the room, the atmosphere was entirely different. Veronica Maxwell paced like a cornered animal. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "The boy's probably just sitting there, staring at the paper, clueless." Mrs. Carter didn't look up from her science magazine. Her voice was soft as a breeze, but sharp enough to cut through ego. "Why does his success bother you so much?" Veronica stopped cold and spun around. "Excuse me?" Carter had lifted her gaze, calm and unblinking. "You've been teaching for over 20 years. Your reputation is solid. Your position isn't being challenged. So why does the idea that a student you once dismissed might be brilliant rattle you this much?" Maxwell didn't get a chance to answer. The door opened. Principal Williams stepped out, holding a fresh stack of blank paper. His expression gave nothing away. "Thompson asked for more paper," he said, then paused. He's already completed the entire exam. He's now writing alternative solutions. Maxwell went pale. That's impossible. It's been, what? Not even 40 minutes? But it's true, Williams said plainly, pulling more paper from a nearby drawer. That could have hidden a phone, maybe. Hamilton was thoroughly checked before entering. At your own request, Carter interjected. And the principal hasn't left that room for a single second. No one's helped him. Veronica fell silent. Something in her icy demeanor was cracking. Maybe it's time, Veronica, Carter said gently. Maybe it's time to accept that you were wrong. Inside, Thompson couldn't hear any of it. He was flying inside a world of numbers where no one blocked his path, no rules held him back, no judgment hovered. Every problem had more than one solution. He wrote as if telling a story, clear, elegant, fluid. Every stroke of his pencil was proof of the countless silent hours no one had ever seen. When he finally set the pencil down, nearly an hour ahead of the time limit, he didn't smile, didn't cheer, he just exhaled, a long, quiet breath, like his entire body had finally been allowed to relax. Whatever came next, the truth now lived on paper. No one could erase it. No one could ignore it. Numbers don't lie. His calculations were living proof of all the sleepless nights, the aching back, and the soft glow of an old phone lighting his path forward. Principal Williams carefully collected his work. "I'll make 2 copies," he said, "one for Miss Maxwell and one for Miss Carter to evaluate independently. We'll reconvene at noon to review." As Thompson stepped into the hallway, students turned to look. Word had spread fast. A special exam. A student once punished, now at the center of attention. But this time, the stares didn't come with eye rolls or sneers. They were filled with curiosity. And a hint of respect. For the first time in his school life, Thompson wasn't being noticed because he was the problem. He was being noticed because he solved them. By noon, the principal's office felt frozen in tension. Thompson entered slowly. His back still ached, but his eyes no longer darted away. Maxwell sat upright, her hand resting on his exam paper like she was holding evidence against herself. Her face was a mask, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty. Carter, on the other hand, met him with warmth, a soft smile, like a hand on his shoulder from across the room. "There's a cushion on the chair for you," Principal Williams said, gesturing to the seat with an added pillow. Thompson sat, nodding a quiet thank you. That tiny act of care, of dignity, was something he'd never been shown before. "I've reviewed the test," Williams began, "so have both teachers present. But before we begin our discussion, Thompson, is there anything you'd like to say?" Thompson glanced at Miss Maxwell. Her lips were drawn tight like she was bracing for impact. "No, sir, my answers already say everything." "And they do," Williams nodded. "Not only did you answer every question correctly, but you provided multiple solution paths for the advanced problems. Mr. Carter," he turned to the right. The younger teacher leaned forward, her voice bright with excitement. "He doesn't just know how to solve them, he understands the underlying concepts. The alternative methods he used show abstract reasoning I rarely see, even in seniors preparing for college." "Mrs. Maxwell?" the principal asked, his tone neutral. The veteran teacher spoke through clenched teeth. The algebra and trigonometry sections were accurate. A pause. "But I still have doubts about the advanced portion. It's too perfect." "You wrote the exam," Carter replied, her tone light but firm, "and the environment was controlled, on your own strict terms." He completed it, clearly, transparently. "So what exactly is it you're objecting to?" Veronica stammered. "Someone must have trained him. There's no way he learned how to solve college-level problems like that on his own." Just then, a knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Principal Williams called. An older man stepped inside. Salt and pepper hair, thin, wire-framed glasses, a calm, composed presence. Thompson lit up. "Dr. Roberts, apologies for the interruption," he said. I'm James Roberts, mathematics professor at State University. I believe I can offer some important insight regarding Thompson's case. Please have a seat, said Williams. And what's your relationship to the student? For the past 6 months, I've been his private mentor. In my 30 years of teaching at the college level, I've never encountered a high school student with Thompson's natural mathematical ability. Veronica's mouth fell open. The foundation of her certainty was starting to crack, and just like that, the masks that had weighed Thompson down, troublemaker, underachiever, classroom disruption, were being peeled away one by one. The truth was stepping forward, undeniable and radiant. He wasn't just the boy who had overcome fear. He was the boy stepping into the light, where talent and courage were finally being seen for what they truly were. You're telling me a college professor has been secretly tutoring an 8th grader? Veronica let out a dry, incredulous laugh. Not tutoring, Dr. Roberts corrected gently. Mentoring. Tutoring fills gaps. But Thompson didn't have gaps. What he needed was a launch pad and someone to help him aim. The room held its breath as Thompson finally spoke. We met at the community center. Dr. Roberts saw me working on an integral and offered to help. Principal Williams leaned back in his chair like he was trying to solve a problem more complex than any he'd faced before. Dr. Roberts, would you be willing to review Thompson's exam and offer your professional assessment? Absolutely, Roberts nodded, taking the photocopy from Williams's hand. As he turned the pages, the professor's expression gradually shifted. First intrigued, then impressed, then quietly delighted. Outstanding work, especially question 17. Your solution was elegant. He looked up, eyes gleaming. No doubt about it. This work is Thompson's. The problem-solving style is consistent with what I've seen throughout our sessions. Then he said what froze the room to silence. I'd estimate his current mathematical level to be on par with a second-year university math major. Veronica let out a choked sound. This is insane. Yesterday he was just another student, and now he's a prodigy? Dr. Roberts didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply spoke, steady and clear. Thompson was never just another student. He's someone with extraordinary ability who's been overlooked. Worse, he was underestimated by a system that was supposed to help him grow. That sentence dropped like a hammer, shattering the last of the assumptions. Principal Williams sat up straighter, voice resolute. I believe we now have ample evidence that Thompson possesses exceptional talent, and that his exam yesterday was entirely valid. He turned to Thompson. I'm sorry I didn't believe you from the start. This school failed you, and I sincerely apologize for that. For Thompson, that apology, simple as it was, weighed more than any prize. He nodded, eyes glassy. So, what now? Miss Cotter asked. For all of them. First, Williams said, we develop a learning plan to support him at his level. And second, his gaze shifted toward Veronica. Now, shrinking into her chair, we address the allegations of physical harm. Veronica spoke faintly. There's no proof. Those marks could have come from home or a fight. We'll investigate, Williams stated firmly. This afternoon I'll be meeting with Thompson's parents. Thank you both for seeing this through. Dr. Roberts and Thompson nodded. A new chapter was beginning. And this time, it wasn't being written by bias or punishment, but by truth, trust, and possibility. When Principal Williams turned and asked, Dr. Roberts, would you be willing to work with us to support Thompson moving forward? The professor smiled, warmly, without hesitation. It would be my honor. As he and Thompson stepped out of the office, the midday sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, casting a soft glow across the boy's small shoulders. The boy who had just rewritten his own definition in a single morning. Behind them, Miss Maxwell remained seated in silence, her face pale, her eyes lost. The world she had once ruled through tone, fear, and doubt was crumbling beneath her feet, one truth at a time. The next morning, the school hallway, where Thompson had always slipped by like a shadow, buzzed with whispers. Students who used to look the other way now turned to watch him as though he were a legend freshly awakened. A few came up to talk to him for the first time. Others, Zach among them, mumbled apologies for things they'd once said or done. At lunch, Thompson sat quietly alone when Zach pulled up a chair across from him, holding his tray, hesitating. "Is it true? You actually know how to do college math?" Before Thompson could answer, 3 more students crowded around, squeezing into the table. One girl excitedly flipped open a notebook. "My brother's in the math magnet program at the high school. He didn't believe me when I told him about you, so he sent this." Thompson glanced over the page. His eyes lit up, not from the challenge, but from recognizing the beauty of the problem. Partial differential equation, not too bad. He picked up a pencil and began to write, explaining as he went, a small smile forming as the students around him watched with awe, as if witnessing a magic trick unfold. Elsewhere in the school, inside the principal's office, the mood was far more serious. Thompson's parents sat across from Mr. Williams. On the desk lay printed photographs of red, raw marks along their son's back, evidence that couldn't be denied. Mr. Thompson clenched his fists. "We moved to this neighborhood for a better school, and now our son's being beaten in class." Mrs. Thompson, still in her nurse's uniform, had tears streaming down her face. "He begged to quit school. We thought it was just peer pressure. We never imagined it was his teacher." Principal Williams lowered his gaze. "I am truly sorry. We've suspended Miss Maxwell and have opened a formal investigation." "That's not enough," Mr. Thompson replied firmly. "She hurt our son, physically, emotionally, and then tried to smear him in front of the entire school." Williams nodded. "We're also revising our policy to strictly ban all forms of physical discipline and require detailed documentation of all disciplinary actions." The room fell into silence. But this time it was the silence of truth, a kind of justice slowly making its way back in. One day, this school might be able to proudly say, "We made it right." That afternoon, Thompson walked across the school courtyard. His backpack hung off one shoulder, his back still sore, but his eyes were steadier than ever. For the first time, he wasn't hiding. Classmates who used to ignore him now waved. Some asked for help with homework. Others had quietly slipped handwritten apologies into his desk. That evening, his phone buzzed with a message. "A rep from State University is visiting tomorrow. They want to meet you. Dr. Roberts." Thompson stared at the screen, stunned. His mind drifted to the countless quiet nights studying under a flickering lamp, the torn seams of his shirt digging into his skin, eyes aching from thick pages and small print. And now, those nights were answering back. He texted back, "I'll be there," then smiled, not because he had beaten someone else, but because, finally, after everything, he had risen above himself. Later that night, in the principal's office, Mr. Williams slid a thick folder across the desk to Thompson's parents. "This is a specialized learning plan we've developed for your son. Dr. Roberts contributed directly to its design. Inside was a schedule of morning sessions at the local high school 3 days a week, continued mentorship under Dr. Roberts, and adjustments to Thompson's current classwork. Every detail tailored to support a gifted mind." Mrs. Thompson opened the folder, eyes scanning every word. "We never even dared dream our son would get a chance like this." The principal smiled, genuinely, humbly. "Your son has a rare gift. Unfortunately, we failed to recognize that early on. I promise you, that won't happen again, not just for Thompson, but for any student who dares to exceed the mold." Meanwhile, across town, in a quiet apartment on the west side, Veronica Maxwell sat motionless on her couch. Her eyes were fixed on a lone document on the coffee table. A formal notice of internal investigation. 27 spotless years of teaching, And now, everything unraveling because of her own actions. Everything she'd built, her authority, her reputation, her control, was now just a worn-out shell. The phone buzzed for the 5th time. A colleague, perhaps, to express shock, or maybe to offer one of those half-hearted condolences people are so good at. Veronica didn't pick up. Deep down, she'd known Thompson was different from the beginning. It was that difference that made her uneasy, then defensive. In her world, talent had to come through discipline, obedience, and time. It couldn't possibly reside in a quiet boy from a working-class neighborhood who often forgot his homework because there was no one at home to remind him. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. She opened it, and standing there was Dr. Roberts, tall, composed, his eyes serious but not condemning. "If you're here to gloat," she said coldly. "I'm here to listen," he interrupted gently. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat across from each other. She made coffee out of habit. He declined it with a nod. "I've taught for over 30 years, he began. "I've met thousands of students. Some learn slowly, others pick things up fast. But very few have the kind of innate reasoning Thompson has." Veronica folded her arms, eyes sharp with bitterness. "That's what everyone says." But Dr. Roberts didn't let her dodge. "What I still don't understand," he continued, "is why that talent threatened you, why you felt the need to crush it instead of lift it up." To be continued. Would you like me to continue translating the next part as well? The shell of composure Veronica had built over decades began to crack. Her voice trembled, the words spilling out like a confession she'd buried for years. "That boy was a slap in the face to everything I believed about education. I spent decades learning those formulas, studying, grinding, sacrificing, and then he comes along, understanding it all instinctively like he was born with it in his head. So what does that make my effort mean? Where's the justice in that?" Dr. Roberts sat in silence for a long moment. He didn't answer right away, because he knew what she needed wasn't a rebuttal. It was release. And so he simply said, gently, "Talent isn't a competition to see who suffered more. It's a gift. One that doesn't always follow the rules. But our responsibility as educators isn't to protect our egos. It's to help that gift live up to its worth." Veronica lowered her head. She didn't cry, but her hands twisted together tightly, like she was trying to hold on to whatever part of herself still made sense. That night, for the first time in years, she reopened old essays from former students, not to grade them, but to understand them. Outside, spring leaves had begun to bud along the trees, and somewhere in the city, a boy once dismissed for being different was taking the first steps of a journey that no longer required him to walk with his head down. "Education isn't supposed to be a fair contest, Ms. Maxwell," Dr. Roberts said, his voice not condemning but firm, as if trying to wake her gently. "It's a pursuit of truth, and the truth is, some minds are born seeing the world in a different kind of light, where others need years to recognize a pattern. Kids like Thompson can feel it in their gut." He paused, his eyes fixed on the older teacher, now staring down at the floor. "That's not a dismissal of your effort, but the tragedy is, you saw that talent, and instead of lifting it up, you treated it like a threat. To him, to yourself, and to every student in your classroom." Veronica lifted her hands to her face, her shoulders trembling. The world she had believed so firmly in, the idea that knowledge must be earned through sweat and submission, was collapsing quietly beneath her. That evening, the school board meeting room was packed beyond capacity. The hearing hadn't even begun, but already every seat was taken. Parents, teachers, students, reporters, all crowding in, some lining the walls. The air hung thick with anticipation, frustration, and a quiet yearning for truth to be seen and heard. Thompson sat in the front row between his parents and Dr. Roberts. He tried to mask the nerves rising in him as he felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. But beside him, Roberts reached out and gently touched his shoulder, steadying him. Behind them, Miss Carter and several other teachers sat quietly, a quiet chorus of conscience for an education system overdue for a reckoning. When Board Chair Eleanor Washington opened the hearing, her voice was crisp, unwavering. Tonight, we're not just here to discuss a teacher or a student or a single incident. We're here to talk about trust and how this system lost it. Principal Williams stepped to the podium. His words didn't try to defend, they carried the gravity of accountability. He recounted everything, from the moment Thompson was humiliated in class to the physical abuse and ultimately the stunning discovery of his mathematical gift. The failure here, he concluded, voice heavy, was not Thompson's. It was ours. The adults who didn't listen, didn't look closer, and didn't believe a child could exceed the mold simply because he was different. The room fell silent until the first waves of applause rippled through the audience, not loud, but resolute. Thompson's father was the first to speak during public comments. Usually a quiet man, today his voice rang with quiet force. My son didn't stay silent because he was afraid. He stayed silent because he knew no one would believe him, because the person hurting him was a teacher. He paused. This isn't the fault of one person. This is a failure of the whole system. Then Ms. Carter stepped up, urging the school to create better processes for identifying and supporting gifted students so that no child would have to prove themselves through pain. Other parents followed, long simmering frustration pouring out, not as a demand for punishment, but as a plea for change. And in that moment, Thompson looked around. The overhead lights shimmered against plastic chairs, catching the contours of each face. And he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Sometimes, to be heard, truth needs one voice, but to be acknowledged, it needs a community willing to rise. With that realization, Thompson's new journey began. No longer a battle between a boy and a teacher, but the beginning of a new story for a generation learning to recognize brilliance even when it doesn't come from where they expected. Just when it seemed the hearing was coming to a close, a student in the back stood and walked toward the microphone. It was Zach, the classmate who used to laugh along every time Thompson was singled out by Miss Maxwell. His voice shook, but his eyes were steady. I'm in Thompson's class, he began, and I used to think Miss Maxwell yelling at him, bullying him, was just how teachers keep order. Looking back, I'm ashamed. Zach turned toward Thompson, his eyes filled with regret. If we kids could see he was being treated unfairly, how did the adults not see it too? That question hung in the air like a quiet accusation, with no need for a name. It wasn't aimed at just Ms. Maxwell. It was aimed at an entire culture of education, still riddled with blind spots and silence. An hour later, School Board Chair Eleanor Washington tapped her wooden gavel gently against the desk, calling the packed room to attention. All eyes turned toward her. Having reviewing all the evidence, testimonies, and findings from the investigation, she said clearly, the board has reached a final decision. The room tensed. First, Veronica Maxwell will be terminated immediately. Furthermore, we will be forwarding her case to the state's Teaching Credential Board with a recommendation to revoke her certification. The entire room erupted in applause, but it was quickly silenced by Washington's raised hand. But accountability cannot stop with one person. Starting next semester, every staff member in this district will undergo mandatory training on how to recognize and report abusive behavior, adopt a zero-tolerance policy for any form of corporal punishment, overhaul the gifted student identification process, and most importantly, implement a secure anonymous feedback system where students can speak up without fear of retaliation. She paused, her gaze locking on Thompson and his parents. On behalf of the entire education system in this district, I offer my deepest apologies to you, Thompson, and your family. We are committed to making sure this never happens again." As the meeting adjourned, Thompson was quickly surrounded by students, parents, teachers, everyone wanting to shake his hand, to offer congratulations, or simply say, "We're proud of you." For the first time in his life, the looks he received weren't colored by judgment. He was no longer the problem kid. He was a talent, a living testament to the quiet power of perseverance. On the way home, the sunset cast a golden glow across the trees that had always lined his neighborhood. Inside the car, no one spoke until his mother reached over from the passenger seat and gently took his hand. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Not just because you're smart. I've always known you were special. But because you were brave." Thompson smiled and shook his head slightly. "I wasn't brave. I stayed quiet for so long. I didn't say anything." His father, eyes still focused on the road, added softly, "But you didn't give up. You kept learning, kept moving forward, even when others tried to hold you back. That's a different kind of bravery, son, the kind that changes systems." In that moment, with his head resting against the window and the late afternoon light trailing behind them, Thompson no longer felt fear or injustice. He felt something more powerful, seen, heard, and, at long last, accepted for who he truly was. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, advanced classes, higher expectations, the gaze of an entire community. But tonight, in the quiet warmth of his parents' eyes, Thompson allowed himself to breathe and feel the sweet freedom of a truth finally recognized. 3 months after that school board meeting, West Side Middle School wasn't the same. Not entirely. At least not in spirit. New anti-bullying posters now lined the hallway walls, bursting with color and messages about respect, equity, and embracing difference. But the real change didn't come from slogans. It came from people, and how they started seeing each other through new eyes. Teachers no longer stayed silent in the face of misconduct. They stepped in, asked questions, listened. Conversations in the faculty lounge shifted from gripes about unruly kids to discussions about how to unlock potential, how to identify hidden strengths. And the students who used to stay silent had begun to speak up when they saw something wrong. That atmosphere, that quiet awakening, spread through the school like an unseen current, and in the middle of that change, Thompson became a symbol. 3 mornings a week, he left campus to take advanced math classes at the high school, where he sometimes even helped older students with their work. But what people remembered most about him wasn't just his extraordinary gift for numbers. It was his humility, his journey from the boy dismissed as trouble to the one who inspired an entire community. One Tuesday afternoon, in the hushed library, Thompson sat surrounded by a small group of 6th and 7th graders. What started as simple homework help gradually turned into something else, an informal lesson. He picked up a pencil and sketched out a few simple diagrams. "When you're reading a word problem," he explained, "just imagine you're translating from one language to another. The language of numbers is always hidden in the words." A girl named Amara beamed. "I get it now. Ms. Collins never explained it like that." Thompson smiled. "Everyone learns differently. Maybe this way works better for you." From a nearby table, Miss Carter watched in silence. When the dismissal bell rang, she walked over, her eyes glowing with quiet pride. "You have a gift for explaining things, Thompson. Not many people can understand deeply and still know how to make it simple." Thompson ducked his head shyly, gathering his books. "I just try to remember how it felt back then, when I didn't get it, and nobody really listened, Miss." "That's empathy." "That's what makes you special," Miss Carter said softly. "Have you given any more thought to the summer program at the university? Professor Roberts mentioned you're still unsure." Thompson nodded slowly. "My parents said I can go." He didn't say more, but the look in his eyes held both excitement and a quiet fear, like someone standing before the great doorway of a brand new journey. A journey not just to prove mathematical talent, but to prove something deeper, to himself, that a boy who once lived in the shadows could now learn to step into the light, not just to succeed, but to lead. Thompson stood in silence for a moment, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, like he was sharing something he'd never said out loud. "I'm still not used to it, having someone really see me. Not just notice him, but see all of him. The quiet, the stillness, the moments of silence not born of shyness, but of having no one willing to listen." Mrs. Carter nodded, her gaze full of understanding. For a child who had spent years trying to disappear just to stay safe, the light of recognition could sometimes be more blinding than the dark. "Move at your own pace," she said gently. "Just don't let old fears lock the doors to something new." Down the hall, they passed the classroom that had once been Ms. Maxwell's domain. Now it belonged to Mr. Diaz, a young, vibrant teacher who didn't teach from behind a desk but moved around the room, connecting, igniting curiosity. Through the open window, Thompson saw hands raised, eyes lit with genuine wonder. It wasn't a classroom anymore. It was a space for discovery. "At least something good came out of all that," Thompson whispered. "Because you were brave," Miss Carter replied. "You started this." Outside, the spring sun cast a soft glow over the familiar pickup truck waiting in the student pickup lane. Ever since the school board hearing, Thompson's parents had made it a point to be more present in his school life. Not just to support, but to show him he wasn't alone anymore. "See you tomorrow, Miss Carter," Thompson called out. "Don't forget Thursday night is the science club presentation to the board," she reminded him with a smile, watching as Thompson nodded confidently. He walked toward the truck, passing a group of eighth graders' faces that had once laughed at him, now awkwardly nodding hello. Thompson felt no bitterness, just a flicker of memory of that day he stood trembling in Ms. Maxwell's class, his back burning, solving a math problem meant to humiliate him. But instead, it became his door to freedom. That day, a boy who'd been beaten down found his voice, and from that voice a whole community began to change. One teacher tried to destroy a child with power, but instead, she forced an entire system to face itself. Thompson climbed into the truck, his face glowing as he told his father about the new equations he and Professor Roberts were working on. The truck pulled away slowly, passing the newly installed sign by the front gate. "Every student deserves to be seen, heard, and valued for who they truly are." And then, the narrator's voice, warm and steady, "Dear friend, when we ignore the gifts within a child, we don't just fail that child, we fail the community by turning away from the very brilliance it needs most." Thompson's story reminds us that genius doesn't choose where it's born, and difference is not something to fix, but something to honor. We're not tested by what we know, but by whether we have the courage to stand up, protect justice, and build schools, communities, and futures where even the smallest light can shine. And if this story touched something in you, share it, because maybe you are the spark for change somewhere else.